It all began when Anthony Freud, the then general director of Houston Grand Opera, had attended a Mariachi Vargas concert, and he called me the next day and said, I have this idea to create a mariachi opera. He said, the music is so emotional, and I love the music so much, it should be on our stage. What do you think? And so that's really how it all began. And then the discussions began on what kind of story it might be. And then, of course, once Mariachi Vargas, the band, became involved, and Pepe Martinez became involved and committed himself to being the composer, we knew that it would have an authenticity that was important. There were really two inspirations for the story. I first started meeting with people, doing research, all the normal kind of things if you're going to create a story. And the one story that had the most effect on me actually was in this building. I had done an opera here 2 years previous, and I remembered that most of the costume shop were Mexicans or Mexican Americans, and the woman who runs the costume shop, Norma, I remembered her story of being born in Mexico, her sister born in the United States, and her mother worked here in the costume shop. And so I knew I was meeting with people at the Mexican consulate, I was talking to journalists, but somehow I had a feeling that they were gonna be more of an inspiration than anybody. And so I went down and talked to them about, first of all, I said to them, what comes to mind when I say mariachi? And they said home. And I knew right then that I wanted to deal with the issue of home. Where is home? So many of us are displaced. We live in other cities, we move away from where our parents were. Where is home? Where you've been brought up, where you live now, where your children are born, where you were born. And I think that's especially true for people that come across the border and a longing to be back in Mexico. I lived in Mexico in Querétaro for 7 years, so I had some sense of the feelings toward the United States and the feelings of wanting to be home and where a lot of people felt at home. So there was that in terms of the Mexican-American story, but I had to get to a place where it came from a more personal place in order to write. And I'm first-generation Italian. My father came over from Italy, and a lot of the actual story that happens on that stage is based on my father's sense of displacement and always longing to be back in the old country, as it was referred to, and what that is, to be someplace away from the place that you feel is actually your home. Well, my first thing I said to Anthony was, well, I'll direct it, but get a Mexican or at least a Latino to write it. And it was, at the time I was actually living in Mexico, so I was, acutely aware of how it had to be authentic. And also, people should write about their own cultures. And, but he was determined that I should do it because he wanted to make sure that the story had a universal, that, he wanted to make sure it was universal, and he thought if it was someone that at least had some knowledge of the country. But I was very, very aware of it. And in fact, for months, I rebelled against writing it and said, well, I will direct it, let's get someone. And the compromise we came to is once Pepe became involved, he came to my house in Querétaro, and I first told him about, the project and what the story was going to be. And what I said to him, because I wrote the initial libretto, and then we collaborated on the lyrics to the songs because I wrote it in English and had to go into Spanish. And so it's really both our work once they start singing. And I just said to him, just promise me you'll keep me authentic. And once I knew that I had that he was beside me, I felt confident that, okay, I can go and write the story, and if anything gets off track or is not true, he would get it on the right track for me. The first scene in the opera was the first thing that I imagined. You meet an older man who's obviously on his deathbed, very, very ill, Mexican-American man it takes place here in Houston. I said it in Houston because we were going to do it here, and Anthony wanted something that would have meaning for the community here. And who has a son he has a son and a granddaughter. And I wanted to right away present the 3 generations of the Mexican-born grandfather, the son that was born in the United States, and probably the most Americanized being the granddaughter. And he starts calling names that nobody recognizes. As, you know, what happens, you know, when people are ill or people dying, they go back years and years and years ago. And so the granddaughter, actually, is most curious about these names and starts investigating, thinking that maybe they're not random names, maybe they're real, something real from his past that he didn't know. And we go into his past 50 years ago and find out about his life back in Michoacan that he had never shared with his son or his granddaughter. Well, I tell you, I probably shouldn't say this maybe, but I'll say it anyway. When I was living in Mexico, and I would mention to Mexican friends, depending on the class of the people involved, the upper class were horrified at the notion, because mariachi music is thought of as a lower class form of entertainment. And their concern was, that's how everybody thinks about us. It's a cliche, and there are great classical Mexican composers. Why aren't you writing a classical thing? And even though at all those, you know, higher class events, you go to the classiest, most beautiful, stunning wedding in Mexico, and they'll have, you know, string quartets and all of that, but the wedding never comes alive until that mariachi band comes on at the end and everybody starts singing the songs. But it was, you know, it was a concern about the perception of it. But I knew right away that mariachi music, being so emotional and character driven and speaking right to the heart, that it would, you know, that it's very theatrical music, which is why it's, you know, been around for so long. So it was a surprising reaction. And I said to a lot, and then those that were very excited about it. And I said, why hasn't this been done? You know, this, you know, original music, you know, set to a story, whether it be musical and everything. And I had a curious reaction from a couple of people where they said, you know, it would take an American to do it. Because again, their own, somehow the view of the music is popular and as stunning as it is. I don't know if I'm articulating this correctly, but it was a surprising, and it all changed when they heard it.
Really? That was going to be my next question.
It all changed when they heard it and they saw it. That I don't know what they expected, you know. I don't know what they expected. And these are people that all knew Vargas, so they knew of the class of this band. But it all changed when they saw it. And I was also told by a few Mexican Americans here in Houston who were very, very helpful in shepherding the project forward. They admitted to me after that they had seen it that they were skeptical about a non-Mexican writing it. And it changed, luckily, afterwards. Well, they just, you know, they said they couldn't imagine it. And, you know, I don't expect other, you know, no matter what I'm doing, I don't expect people to know what's going on in my head. You know, I mean, when you start to talk about something, it's why I very rarely, before something's complete, I'm not very good at describing things or articulating what something is going to be, because it's still a you know, big thought bubble inside my head. And so, no, they didn't eat their words as much as they were very moved by it and very pleased by it. But I don't expect people to, you know, and I went to a lot of these people in Mexico just because I wanted as much information as I could get and as much help as I could get. And they were just a little surprised at the notion. Well, a lot of people are when they hear the idea. You know, it's like a blues opera, a jazz opera, a rock opera. It's just a style. It's just music, and you know, and this particular music tells a very emotional story. Well, after we premiered it here in Houston a few years ago, another surprise by Anthony Freud. I was directing the production of Dead Man Walking here, and he walked in and said, "Oh, we have our second production for Cruzar." And I immediately jumped and thought, okay, it's going to be San Antonio. We're going to be in some border. We're going to be, you know, on the side of the road in some border town. And he said, the Châtelet in Paris. And I said, wow, Châtelet in Paris, if you don't know it, it's sort of what New York City Opera is to the Met. You know, there's the Paris Opera, and then the second one is the Châtelet. I mean, this, you know, it's it's been there for hundreds of years. It's glorious, glorious place. And right before our piece, Placido Domingo was there with an opera. I mean, so that's the level of the place. And I was stunned and nervous because I knew when we premiered it here in Houston, we were very much embraced by the community, which I was very grateful for. And also there was a big interest just because the story being so close to home. So I didn't know what that would be at all. And so we trotted off to Paris and presented it there, opened the season there. They don't really have a feeling they don't know mariachi music. So it was very exotic and new to them. And it's a story that I've told before, but I'll tell it again. The thing that told me that maybe maybe we had ultimately fulfilled Anthony Freud's original vision was that after the dress rehearsal, one of the executives of the theater, a woman, came down and said, "I just want to let you know that I brought my children because I thought they would enjoy this music." And after the performance, they were with their nanny, who's from Croatia, and their nanny was crying. And I said, "Oh, did you enjoy it?" And she said, "It's my story." Because of course Paris in France has so many immigrants, and that's when that was a little bit of a sigh of relief on my part to know that it was that it maybe speaks to the nature of all displaced people and all of us that move all over the world and their sense and longing for home. It's in both Spanish and English. Right. One of the things I wanted to do in terms of authenticity is that have the characters speak as they would speak. The ones that are, in Mexico, the scenes obviously are all in Spanish. The ones in the United States are a mixture. One of the things that someone had told me, and I put it in a couple of the scenes, was the notion that very often a grandchild will be speaking in English, the grandparent will be speaking in Spanish, and everybody understands each other. And so we have all of that going on. So when there's, yeah, oh yeah? Yeah, I mean, when so many people told me that, so I did that. So they go in and out of both languages in Houston, in the Houston scenes. So what, I almost think you have to get mariachi out of your mind, because that has such connotations for different people, whether it's three guys in the corner of a bar blasting horns in your ear, you have to get that out of your mind and just say, this is an American story, period. Like any other American story that's being put on the stage, whether it be a musical or an opera, and certainly people coming to the Opera House are used to seeing things in different languages. But this is an American story. It's our story. It's part of this country. And what I've tried to do in this particular story is tell the other side of the immigrant story. We a lot of Americans just view it through the news or the people that we see or encounter in our lives, but very rarely do we think about, how did that man get here? What was his life beforehand? Does he even want to be here?